There exists in the Star Wars galaxy a prophecy of one who is meant to bring balance to the Force. George Lucas made clear his intent that Anakin Skywalker, later turned Darth Vader, was, as believed by Qui-Gon Jinn, in fact the chosen one meant to fulfill this prophecy. Though Luke Skywalker is the hero of the original Star Wars trilogy, his character arc culminates in the redemption of his father, rather than the destruction of the primordial evil force in the story, Darth Sidious, or the Emperor. Anakin was ultimately responsible for the destruction of both the Jedi and the Sith. George Lucas has confirmed that regardless of his fall from grace, and Luke taking up the mantle of the hero, Anakin did not lose his designated role as the Chosen One, meant to bring balance to the Force. Yet the question remains, what does balance of the Force mean? For the first part of this discussion, I'll be focusing primarily on the prequel and original trilogies. For better or worse, the sequel trilogy as it exists was not part of George Lucas' original vision for Star Wars. As Dave Filoni has said in interviews and commentary, George Lucas should be seen as the arbiter of anything related to the deeper lore and mythology of Star Wars, particularly in relation to the Force. Perhaps if we can answer the question of what balance of the Force means in the mythology of Star Wars as imagined by Lucas, we can better understand the manner in which the sequel trilogy fits narratively and thematically as a continuation of what was once a complete six-film saga. George Lucas based the mythology in Star Wars largely upon the monomyth, or the hero's journey, as outlined by Joseph Campbell in The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Campbell was himself influenced by the work of Carl Jung, who proposed the existence of archetypal forces, emerging from the collective unconscious. These archetypes are ancient patterns of personality distinct from the individual unconscious described by Sigmund Freud. They manifest in the real world, taking different shapes or forms when filtered through the subjective lens of the individual. Joseph Campbell's writings on comparative mythology describe the emergence of these archetypal personas through myths, folklore, and religious stories from around the world. Campbell described the universal patterns and character types seen in the stories told in disparate societies across time as a manifestation of innate psychological forces. Though the names and faces vary, the forms are surprisingly constant. Campbell likened these archetypal characters to masks picked up and worn by individuals by whom they are manifest and given life. George Lucas constructed the mythology and characters of Star Wars by distilling these powerful, universal motifs. The Force may be likened to the collective unconscious, a substratum underlying physical reality, which both emerges from and gives rise to individual organic life.
Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us.
The primary characters in Star Wars are modern variations on the archetypal forms, including the hero, the mentor, and the shadow. We see these characters exchange masks at various stages in their lives. Notably, Anakin Skywalker, a representation of the hero in the prequel trilogy, later dons the mask of the shadow, through an experience of death and rebirth as Darth Vader. Jung described the archetypes as inherited potentials which take different shapes when actualized through the thoughts and behaviors of an individual.
We are confusion, anger, sadness, joy, and serenity.
The dark side of the Force itself may thus be described as a representation of the universal shadow archetype. The shadow is an inextricable aspect of an individual's psyche. It is the archetypal persona with the potential to do evil things. Every person has a shadow. Jung wrote of confronting and synthesizing the shadow, meaning evil is unrealized potential that exists within every individual. To confront and synthesize the shadow is to recognize one's own weaknesses, the paths that could lead one to act upon those ideas and manifest the shadow archetype in the world. Darth Vader always existed as a potential within Anakin, which was actualized when he chose to put on the mask of the shadow. George, in various interviews, has simplified the dichotomy between the light and dark sides of the Force as representations of compassion and selfishness, respectively.
I mean, you got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. And you want to keep them in balance. What happens when you go to the dark side is it goes out of balance.
So what then is meant by balance? An equal devotion to or manifestation of both good and evil, light and dark?
Oh, I don't think so.
At the end of the original six-film saga, both the Jedi and the Sith have been destroyed, so many have speculated that total devotion to the light side of the Force was the primary flaw of the Jedi, as was total devotion to the dark side a flaw of the Sith. But this interpretation would have no basis in any real-world moral or ethic. It would imply that total devotion to good or to compassion is a moral evil, a notion which is not reflected in any of our religious or mythological stories. There are no gray Jedi. Anakin balances the Force not by embracing or blending the ideals of both the Jedi and the Emperor, but by wholly rejecting the dark side. The original trilogy concludes with the return of the Jedi, the return of the light, achieving balance. Luke Skywalker and his sister Leia Organa remain to rebuild a new Jedi Order after the fall of the Empire. But wait, what about the fall of the Jedi Order?
The time has come. Execute Order 66.
In the path to achieving balance, thousands of Jedi were also killed. Weren't they servants of the light side of the Force? Why was the Jedi Order destroyed? Was this the will of the Force? Often we see in our religious stories purgation of the religious institutions after they have become corrupted and deviated from their original mandate. The Jedi were devoted to the light side of the Force, but that does not mean their decisions and actions were morally aligned with the light.
Were you not cast out of your order?
I left voluntarily.
Yes, but you were motivated to leave by the hypocrisy of the Jedi Council.
It is also worth noting that corruption of the institution is not necessarily reflected in the moral attitudes of the individuals within that institution. Returning to Yun, if we consider the shadow, the dark side of the Force, to be an inextricable aspect of any individual or institution, it cannot be eliminated because it exists within all beings as a byproduct of free will. The collective unconscious is an inherited trait. Call it original sin passed down from primordial forebears. As long as good is a choice, evil is a possibility.
You must choose!
This means that the light must continually confront and synthesize the shadow, the dark side, not by integrating and acting upon those ideas or desires, but by recognizing their existence, keeping them in check, and actively choosing not to manifest the dark side in the material world. When balance is achieved, neither light nor dark ceases to exist. The light must be actualized, and the dark must remain unrealized potential, the byproduct of choice. To eliminate the dark side is to eliminate free will, freedom to choose the light, and thus the individual no longer has agency and becomes an automaton, creating an imbalance. I think there's evidence for this understanding. In the final arc of the Clone Wars Season 6, Yoda's journey leads him to a place where he confronts his shadow, visually represented as an evil form of Yoda, and overcomes his own darkness. Even Yoda has this dark seed within himself, which has the potential to grow and emerge through thought and action if it remains unrecognized, and it is only through recognition of that evil that resides in himself that Yoda is able to attain the path to immortality.
Recognize you. I do. Part of me you are. Yes. Power over me you have not.
Prior to this revelation and confrontation, Yoda believed himself to be devoid of and separate from the dark side. The shadow within himself was unrecognized.
Part of me you are not.
You can apply this principle to the Jedi Order as a whole. Anakin is the dark potential, the shadow of the Jedi Order, which the Council fails to recognize. The Jedi serve the light, but don't recognize the cracks in the foundation, which ultimately allow Anakin's turn to Darth Vader.
He is the key to everything.
To bring balance to the Force?
To destroy.
Qui-Gon, not surprisingly the first Jedi seen in the story to attain the path to becoming a Force Ghost, instructing Yoda from beyond the grave, is likely the one Jedi who could have prevented Anakin's fall. Qui-Gon was the father figure absent in Anakin's life. That role was later vacated by Qui-Gon's death at the hands of Darth Maul and filled by Chancellor Palpatine. Qui-Gon's instruction to Obi-Wan in the opening scene of The Phantom Menace to obey the will of the living Force signals his role as a prophet-like figure to the Jedi Order. Yet the Jedi Council failed to heed his words, which served as herald for their impending destruction. The Order had become rigid, too strongly set in tradition to adapt to new ideas.
But Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future.
But not at the expense of the moment. Be mindful of the living Force, young Padawan.
Evidenced by their initial refusal to train Anakin because he was too old, despite the fact that he very well could have been the chosen one, which introduces a sort of pharisaical illusion. They had too closely aligned themselves politically with the Republic, and thus served as generals rather than peacekeepers during the Clone Wars. Evil commanded both armies, yet the Jedi chose a side. Neutrality was the only path that could have averted Sidious's trap. It was not the will of the light side of the Force that the Jedi serve as generals.
As a Jedi, we were trained to be keepers of the peace, not soldiers. But all I've been since I was a Padawan is a soldier.
All of these factors play directly into the events which result in Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader, the destruction of the Jedi Order, and the fall of the Republic. Essentially, there existed an imbalance in the Force. The Jedi's vision was clouded by the dark side, because their ideology had fallen out of alignment with the light side of the Force.
The shroud of the dark side has fallen.
They attributed this lack of foresight to some external shroud, failing to recognize the dark potential within their own ranks in the form of Anakin Skywalker, whose fall was in part precipitated by their own corruption. Palpatine's machinations were indeed a very real threat, and his identity as Darth Sidious, the puppet master orchestrating the events of the Clone Wars, remained elusive as a result of the Jedi Council's clouded vision. The inability of the Jedi to recognize this evil force, even when in such close proximity, may be understood to mean the Force was not speaking to them, because they weren't truly listening. The Jedi of the Old Republic, prior to Darth Bane's creation of the Rule of Two, fought to vanquish an external evil force. For 1,000 years, the Jedi believed they had succeeded in eradicating the source of evil. Just like war, peace is a snare. Over time, their alignment with the light side of the Force drifted. In bright sunlight, high noon, contrast is reduced. The shadows become difficult to see. Only at sunset, the twilight of the Republic, as the light fades and the shadows grow deep, do they recognize the one they cast, following their own footsteps. Balance does not mean equal parts light and dark manifest in the world, nor does it mean the eradication of the dark, but the proper orientation of light and dark. The former must be actualized in the world, and the dark must remain unrealized potential. The only way to maintain balance is to realize that the dark resides within. Any other path leads to an imbalance. To view the dark side as something which can be eliminated, as did the Jedi, is to externalize it, and thus leave the shadow within unchecked, able to metastasize and overtake the light.
Then you must go.
What's in there?
Only what you take with you.
Consider that Luke, in his training on Dagobah, enters the dark side cave and confronts a vision of Vader, ultimately witnessing his own face behind the mask. He later learns that Vader is his father. Thus, Luke confronts his own shadow. Vader, the external evil he must confront, is his own blood. Luke thus must understand and come to terms with the knowledge that the very potential for evil which transformed Anakin Skywalker also exists within himself. Interestingly, this revelation is also what allows Luke to see the light remaining in Vader, inapparent to even Yoda and Sidious, which ultimately brings about Vader's redemption, the defeat of the Emperor, and the salvation of the galaxy. It follows that if the potential for evil actualized by Vader resides within Luke the son, then so too must the good that is in Luke reside within Anakin the father.
I know there is good in you. The Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully.
During the final throne room confrontation in Return of the Jedi, Luke cast aside his lightsaber, refusing to strike down Darth Vader in anger. Luke recognizes the shadow in himself, visually represented by his mechanical hand, the first step to becoming more machine than man. In the ultimate act of non-violence, Luke saves the galaxy, not by destroying Vader, but by refusing to become him.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
He has no hope of defeating the Emperor. Luke recognizes his inability to destroy this external source of evil, yet understands he retains power over his own choices, the destiny of his own soul. Luke is willing to suffer sacrificially to preserve the light in himself, and thus brings Anakin back from the dark side of the Force. Yoda and Obi-Wan mentored Luke, but failed to see this potential in Vader. Their advice to Luke was flawed. Obi-Wan told Luke that if he refused to kill Vader, the Emperor would have already won. Yet the Emperor failed because of Luke's refusal to kill Vader. Anakin was ultimately the instrument by which balance was achieved. He finally synthesized his shadow Vader when he saw the suffering of his child at the hands of the Emperor. Anakin, in the last moments of his life, refused the shadow, returned to the light, and defeated the Emperor, the symbolic source of imbalance. The mask of the shadow was at last removed, and Anakin was able to look on his son with his own eyes one final time. Luke and Leia, twins born of a union unsanctioned by the previous Jedi Order, were left at the end of the saga to rebuild the institution meant to serve the light side of the Force. Luke did not reject the teachings of Obi-Wan and Yoda wholesale. He integrated their instruction, but also followed the will of the living Force, recognizing it was not the will of the light to destroy Vader. At the end of the 6-film saga, balance was achieved, and harmony restored to the galaxy. The shadow of the Jedi Order was confronted and synthesized. Anakin was redeemed, and Vader returned to the ethereal plane of archetypes, unrealized potential. Yet we know George Lucas, at the time he sold Lucasfilm to Disney, had written stories for a sequel trilogy of films focusing on the original trilogy heroes and the grandchildren of Darth Vader. So the question must be asked, what story remains to be told after the Force has been balanced? The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker were not based on those original drafts, so they don't provide a clear picture of Lucas' vision for the concluding chapter of Star Wars. In the next part of this discussion, we will need to look to other sources to extrapolate a potential narrative and thematic trajectory for the story building from the balance achieved at the end of Return of the Jedi. Thank you for watching this video. There are many more Star Wars topics I'm hoping to cover. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you want to be notified when future videos, including the next part of this discussion, go live, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. Most important, let me know what you think in the comments section down below.